The Isle of Man's 2025 budget is here, and with its big decisions on tax, spending and the future of public services. From income tax and national insurance to government efficiency, education, healthcare and even potholes, this budget affects everyone. But we heard time and time again from the Chief Minister over the past year that the island had to exercise financial discipline. Yet this budget is set to spend £1.4 billion. So where's the money coming from? In this episode, brought to you by Crow Isle of Man, I sit down with the Treasury Minister, Allinson, for a tell-all on the numbers, the challenges, and what it all means for you.
What we've been doing over the last year is really trying to instil that fiscal discipline. I think the Chief Minister was absolutely right during the year to warn that if unchecked, government spending could get out of control, if unchecked, that the government headcount could increase exponentially, and we needed to get our house in order if we were going to derive decent value for taxpayers' money. So what we've been doing in this budget is, whilst we're increasing the availability of budgets for individual departments, we are also capping those. So there's a 2% increase in pay costs for all departments apart from Manx Care and a 1% increase in non-pay costs. What that actually means is that across government we'll be looking for £25 million efficiency savings to be drilled in. Each department will need to make sure that they're providing the services that they need to provide to the people of the Isle of Man in the most cost-effective and efficient way possible, and really weed out any inefficiencies and things that they're doing at the moment that they really should stop doing going forward.
Was it a deliberate strategy by the government to create the impression that the Isle of Man was in financial trouble?
I think the Isle of Man was in financial trouble. We saw record high inflation. We saw probably the highest overspends in departments that we've ever seen. £43 million extra needed to be put in to preserve essential frontline services. And I made it quite clear that that was important to do, that we should not head for austerity. But in this budget, what we've tried to do is rebalance that budget. We have said, and we've continued to say, that we need to restrict the drawdown on reserves and reduce our dependence on our reserves. That's exactly what we're doing this time. But it means that there will need to be difficult decisions made, and we will continue to need to do those if we are going to provide the services people want at an affordable price for the Isle of Man.
You're saying that most people should be better off under this budget. Who is most?
The vast majority of people would be better off under this budget. What we've tried to do is absolutely make sure that we can put money in people's pockets. So the decrease in the rate of income tax, the increase in the personal allowances, the changes to the national insurance thresholds, the changes to the child benefit thresholds, the increases to benefits overall, and also the extra investment we're putting into education, health, and also into infrastructure development and local businesses will all make a real tangible difference to people. There are some people in particular circumstances, because of the change of the national insurance thresholds, who may end up paying slightly more national insurance than they would have done previously. However, that is to absolutely ensure that the National Insurance Fund is sustainable going forward. And again, that was reiterated during a debate in the House of Keys recently.
Let's say that there is a family, they have two children, both parents earn £100,000 a year. Are they not a working family then?
They are a working family, and they will be better off under this budget because of the reduction in the headline rate of income tax that we've brought in. But when you look at the demographics of workers on the island, most of them are on a median wage of around about £43,000. We want to make sure that what's sometimes been described as the squeeze middle are equally benefit from the changes that we've made. And that's why we've dealt with national insurance thresholds, the tax rate, the personal allowance, and also child benefit thresholds to make sure that more people on salaries up to £60,000 can now get the full benefit of the child benefit. And I think that is important because it's those people who don't depend on standard benefits or don't necessarily benefit from the low rates of income tax that we have, but have also experienced increased prices and the increased cost of either rent or mortgages, who really have been squeezed more, and we need to give the right support to them.
The higher rate of income tax is being reduced from 22% to 21%. What is that 1% going towards? Because people are still worse off from an income tax perspective now than they were 2 years ago.
They are. You're quite right. They are paying more tax than they were when they were paying 20%. But we've changed the personal allowance. That is an extra £250 for a single person, £500 for a jointly assessed couple. What we are doing with that money is putting it particularly into health, social care and education, those critical parts of government that touch most people's lives. So an extra £25 million would be made available to the Department of Health and Social Care. An extra £8.3 million would be made available to education, £3 million of which will be ring-fenced for the childcare strategy and making sure we can offer accessible and affordable childcare for working families on the island.
The tax cap is increasing to £220,000 per year. Is that an admission that high net worth individuals aren't paying their fair share?
No, it isn't. It's a reaction to some of the discussions we had last year when I launched the tax strategy, and people questioned the ongoing viability of the tax cap and whether it was still the best way of trying to encourage high net worth individuals and entrepreneurs to our island. We have recalculated that. Part of the budget this year will be the laying of a report on the tax cap in general in terms of how successful it's been. I think it definitely has a place in terms of retaining people on the island, in terms of driving inward investment on the island. And we've seen some people who have high net worth investing in the infrastructure of our island and private investment. What we need to do is work with the Department for Enterprise to look at other ways that we can encourage this, because we know that we have a very attractive economy on the Isle of Man, and we want to get people over here and retain people here who are going to invest and create the jobs and skills for tomorrow.
National insurance threshold changes will see lower earners paying less, but higher earners paying more. Can you clarify exactly how much more the upper bracket will contribute?
I mean, in terms of the thresholds, the lower threshold is increasing by 5%, which takes people on low income out of national insurance. It means that they're paying less. The upper threshold, which hasn't changed for over a decade, is going up by 10%. What this means is that somebody on £55,000 a year will be paying more national insurance going in, but they'll be charged less income tax. And again, it all depends on the exact demographics of that household, whether they will be slightly better off under this budget or they may be paying slightly more. Overall, though, by boosting the economy of the Isle of Man, by investing in the infrastructure, but by also encouraging consumer and business confidence, I think this budget will improve the outcome for everyone on the island.
You've allocated £25 million as a contingency fund for healthcare. Is that recognition that the allocated £360-odd million that's allocated to healthcare in the budget is actually insufficient?
No, we've allocated the budget according to the funding formula that was agreed under the previous administration. What we absolutely acknowledge is two things. One, it's important that we have contingency to deal with the pressures that healthcare is under, both here and across, in terms of increasing drug costs, increasing costs of staff, increasing costs of operations, and the increasing demand of the population. But we also absolutely have to make sure that people get value for money from the health service, that the health service provides what they need in terms of access to GPs, access to dentists. We need that reform going forward, and so we will be holding Manx Care accountable to how they spend their money so that everyone can see the benefits of that extra investment going forward.
Has Manx Care lived up to your expectations? Because it wasn't long ago you were asked if Manx Care was broken. You said no. Do you still believe that?
I don't think our healthcare service is broken. I think Manx Care have got an unenviable job of significant reform within a very tight budget, but they have had considerable advances, particularly when you look at the CQC reports, you look at the driving forward of patient safety, when you look at the reduction of waiting lists that we've seen as well, and the provision of specialist services, but they need to do more. And we will see over the next year that the Minister for Health and Social Care, the Honourable Claire Christian, will be looking at the mandate, looking at the operational plan for healthcare, and really making sure that it delivers what people expect, which is often frontline services, preventative care, rather than more and more people having to go into Noble's Hospital.
Do you think the public still believes that the healthcare system isn't broken? Because people do want to know why there was a report, there's a Jonathan Michael report. They want to know why its recommendations weren't implemented in full.
Some of the recommendations there were quite wide-ranging in terms of alternative ways of funding the NHS. I think we've been clear in this administration that the basic ethos of the National Health Service, being free at the point of need, absolutely is a commitment that we will not stray from. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge the increasing needs, demands and costs of healthcare for the people of the Isle of Man. So it's getting that balance right, whereby we have a dependable, successful, a quality healthcare service on the Isle of Man, which at the same time is affordable for the people of the Isle of Man and the taxpayers here. And that will constantly need reevaluation, and we will constantly need to hold the Department of Manx Care accountable to how they spend their money so people get the best value for it.
Education funding is rising by £8.3 million. What will that money actually go towards? Can you guarantee that it will address concerns around teacher shortages and classroom resources, for example?
I mean, in terms of teacher shortages, I think the department has been very successful in terms of recruiting teachers here in a way that other places in the British Isles have struggled because of relocation packages that they've offered, because of the standard of education on the Isle of Man. They've managed to recruit even in those difficult areas. However, we know that obviously we're in a competitive market. We need to offer the right possibilities for training on Ireland for people who want to go into education and for advancement of people's careers, and we're doing that. A lot of the extra money will be going into some of the increased costs to drive forward quality education, particularly for those children with special educational needs or complex medical needs. And £3 million of the extra £8.3 million will also be allocated to increase money going into the childcare strategy, which will, I hope, provide even more support for working families in terms of the access and affordability for childcare, but also provide that for those who have special educational needs, who often find access to childcare incredibly challenging.
£5.3 million is being committed to digitising and automating government processes. How will that impact public sector jobs? Will it lead to job cuts?
We know that we need to improve the productivity and efficiency of the Isle of Man government. That was clearly set out by the Chief Minister. What this extra money going into digitalisation will do is deliver more convenient services for people. Now, as more services move online, we need to make sure that those who are digitally excluded are not left out. But we also need to make sure that the staff that are allocated to those departments, if they're no longer needed in a particular role, can be reassessed. Their roles can perhaps be refunctioned so that they're providing more frontline services to people and helping people navigate the government system. But if necessary, also, we have a reduction in the overall government headcount if, through digitalisation and automation, we don't need so many people on counters giving out forms and taking in forms that are filled out by hand in the future.
You've announced an empty properties initiative. You haven't provided the details of that yet, though. What will that scheme involve, and how will it tangibly increase housing availability?
In Tynwald last year, we had a long discussion about empty and dilapidated properties, and more of a carrot and stick approach to try to bring these back into use, either for housing or economic use. What we will be doing is bringing forward some suggested changes to the legislation, which will allow local authorities to not zero rate properties or bring them back into the rate system. And that hopefully will act as a bit of a catalyst for getting them back into use. The Department for Enterprise, through their local economy strategy, have also launched initiatives that will give grants to people to bring, for instance, rooms above shops into use as housing. And we will also be looking at various tax incentives we can use to increase the availability of residential accommodation, particularly within our town centres. Wider than that, through the changes we've made to various budgets, particularly with the DOI, we're looking at making sure that the housing reserve that's currently within DOI is ring-fenced outside of it, so we can absolutely enable local authorities to borrow and build and maintain their social housing so that we can drive forward the access to this for people who actually depend on local authority housing.
So in effect, it's a fundraising initiative in the sense that people who own empty and dilapidated properties will eventually face harsher taxes because of them?
It's a carrot and stick approach, because the reason that properties are empty can be multifactorial. When we've done surveys, we found that some of them are empty because people are off island, some of them are empty because people are in hospital or nursing homes for a long period of time. So it's not sometimes just because people are deliberately leaving them empty. But we do need to make sure that with the need for housing and affordable housing on the island, we do as much as possible to make sure that we have the best use of the existing housing stock before we start looking at either brownfield site development or greenfield site development for new housing.
A consultation is going to be launched on a healthcare levy. Are you laying the groundwork for the introduction of a national health insurance style system?
No, I'm not. The last budget, we pointed out quite clearly that there was a gap between the amount of money that was needed for healthcare funding and the amount of money that was coming in through general revenue. Healthcare funding is growing faster than the economy, and so that gap is there, and we need to address that. Yes, we can produce a more efficient healthcare system. Yes, we can reduce waste, particularly the waste of people's time when they're trying to access the healthcare system by getting an appointment when they need it with a GP. But we also need to be honest about the cost of the healthcare service. I'm absolutely committed to the founding principles of the NHS, but what we need to do is see how extra funds can be raised from the public and from corporations to fund the healthcare service that we have at the moment. So the idea of the healthcare levy is, rather than just use income tax and national insurance, how we can produce a small, reasonable levy for the people who use the NHS to actually contribute towards the costs of that NHS. We'll be going out for consultation for that after the budget, and I hope on the basis of that we can bring forward some firm proposals for Tynwald to consider later on in the year.
What would you say to people who might say, why was this not done last year? Because we were paying heightened taxes. They've just wasted a year.
It's been a struggle to get this through the various processes, including the Council of Ministers and Tynwald. I've been asked several times why we haven't progressed this. Treasury have been busy on a number of fronts over the last year, particularly looking at the recalculation of the VAT sharing agreement that will be concluded this month and that hopefully I'll be able to announce as part of the budget. So we've had lots of things hanging over us, including the economic forecasts that have been quite changeable over the last 12 months. What we're doing with the healthcare levy proposal is proposing a new form of income that will be ring-fenced for the NHS. It will need to go out for consultation. It will need to be done in the right way with the right amount of consensus so we can guarantee the long-term future funding of our healthcare service. But I apologise that has taken longer than I initially anticipated.
Most government services are set to increase by 3%. Given that inflation is lower than this, isn't that just an indirect taxation, or even a stealth tax, as they're sometimes called?
No, it's not. What we've done in terms of increasing the allocation to individual departments is allocate 2% to their overall pay budget and 1% to their non-pay budgets. Those are segmented. So what that means in effect, when we know that inflation is running at 2.5% and wage claims have been running at similar levels, is that every department will need to absolutely look at the provision of services, drive efficiency, drive economies to actually come in on budget and still provide those services. We calculate that over the entire government that will need an extra £25 million worth of efficiency savings, but we're absolutely committed to help those departments drive those forward from a whole range of ways, including getting them back to balance in terms of their budgets, looking at procurement, looking at how they provide those services in the best and most efficient way possible. This is government trying to do its bit to drive taxpayers, make sure that taxpayers get value for money on all the services, but also control government spending going forward.
I just want to pick up on something you said there. Government departments will receive a 2% uplift for pay and 1% for non-pay. Is that 2% allocated amount for PSE staff, or is that non-PSE workers?
This is across all departments apart from Manx Care, which have a different funding formula. So what this means is that any pay increase above that 2% will need to come from those departments' existing budgets. What this means is that departments will need to look at their headcount, will need to look at how they allocate staff, how they deal with vacancies, to really make sure that we can get value for money.
So it is PSE staff?
It includes all public sector staff across all departments.
Unions have consistently argued that public sector pay has eroded over time, so are you expecting a dispute over that?
Not at all. This is an overall allocation of pay. Now, I understand the position of the PSC and lots of other people in the private and public sector about wage increases. But what we need to do as a government is set a budget that's achievable, but also set a budget that we can afford. As you've already pointed out, we are needing to draw down from reserves to balance this budget going forward and reduce that drawdown on reserves. But it's absolutely imperative on individual departments that they drive efficiency and value for money in everything that they do. And with certain departments, particularly education, Department of Home Affairs, and the Department of Health and Social Care, a large part of their budget is pay. And so it's absolutely right that they should look at their workforce. They should make sure that they have the right skills in that workforce, but also pay them adequately for providing the services that all of us demand and expect.
You've chosen not to increase employer national insurance contributions. Was that a political decision to avoid upsetting the business community, even at the expense of additional revenue? I mean, I suppose there is an election on the horizon.
It was an economic decision because we know that whilst we have a very resilient economy, particularly the local economy and local businesses have come under significant pressure. And we've listened to that. The changes in terms of our plans for minimum wage increases and merging that with the living wage demonstrate that we are listening to local businesses. With the increasing employer NI contributions was something that was applied in the United Kingdom. We looked at that as an option for funding, but also saw the effects it could have on particularly the majority of business we have on the Isle of Man, which is small and medium size. And so we made the conscious decision not to increase employer national insurance, not to increase employee national insurance, and to look at the thresholds instead. And we will continue to do that to try to encourage businesses to exist, expand, and prosper on the Isle of Man.
Pensions is something that was going to be a controversial part of the budget. Those changes which you appeared so keen on in Tynwald towards the end of last year are now paused. Some MHKs said the way it was being done didn't comply with Tynwald processes. Is you pausing it an admission that it didn't comply, or is it an admission that the proposal wasn't as bulletproof as you might have hoped?
Neither, really. The budget speech I gave last year, I stated quite clearly that we would need to look at the triple lock, that we would need to come up with other proposals for uprating those third of pensioners who are on the new Manx state pension, because if we did nothing, the National Insurance Fund was expected to run out by 2047. Now, I brought forward proposals. They were published in January after extensive debate in November by Tynwald. But obviously they didn't curry favour with the elected members of our Parliament. And I've had to respond to that and obviously change those proposals going forward. I'm very grateful to the people who took part in the debate to express their views and the views of their constituents. And I've responded to that. But that problem doesn't go away. And what I've absolutely committed to doing is come back in April for a further debate, go out for public consultation on a range of ways that we can sustain the National Insurance Fund to protect not only the pensions that people receive now, but also protect the pensions for those who want to receive it in the future.
I know you've spoken a little bit about this, but what can you tell us about how government departments are going to be more economical? Because if the public are being expected to tighten their own belts, it's reasonable to expect the government to do the same.
That's absolutely right, which is why we've brought in a whole degree of measures right across government to drive that fiscal responsibility. Over the last year, we've had monthly scrutiny panels where members of Treasury will sit down with the officers of various departments, looking month by month about their spending, seeing where the pressures are, seeing how they can overcome overspends in certain areas. And we've also been publishing quarterly management accounts so that the public and political members can see exactly how we're doing. And that's been relatively successful. Earlier on in the last year, we were forecasting 5 departments were going to overspend by the end of the year. We've got that down to just the one, which is unfortunately health and social care. But going forward, we will be doing an overall priority budgeting programme and also a spending review right across government so we can make sure that we constantly provide those essential public services that people want, but do it in the most efficient way possible. And that will need some difficult decisions going forward, but we are absolutely committed to provide good government services at a price that is affordable for the public of the Isle of Man.
Those scrutiny panels you've just mentioned there is, if there is something that's identified as having a detrimental economic impact, is that a case of asking the department to change things, or is it telling the department to change things?
It's working with departments. Treasury have tried to do as much as possible to support departments during a very difficult economic cycle, to come in on budget, to rationalise their services, to improve their services and invest in those services. But it can cause tensions at times. And also we've had to sometimes look at the budgets of various departments and see if they are realistic. Certain departments have had overspends which are completely unavoidable because of increased costs, and in those cases we've had to dip into contingency funds to actually support them and help them out, and we will continue to do that. But again, this isn't Treasury wielding a big stick over the rest of government. It's Treasury trying to support government to provide those services that the public need.
Do you think there will come a time where Treasury needs to wield that big stick?
I think it's certainly at the budget time, when we've had individual departments in to explain their departmental plans, we have been extremely firm with them that some of the extra services they want to provide, or some of the expansions they'd want to develop, are not affordable within this budget. And so we've had to, unfortunately turn down some of the revenue and capital bids that have been presented to us. But we've also had to be realistic with those departments that if we are going to put money into the economy and drive economic growth, in the long term, this is absolutely the right thing to do.